We're on to the last starter deck for our little pre-release event, and it is the man himself, the absolute unit, Kaido. He's a walking fridge, and we're going to talk about it. Hey, welcome back, roommates. Alright, we have the last of our starter decks to go over today, and it is the Kaido deck. This is actually the deck that I am most familiar with, and am most comfortable with, personally. I think the format itself is decently balanced, so you won't just be blown back depending on what deck you use. But I think I can give you a few tips if you are planning to use the unit known as Kaido. Now, before I even go into the leader, I want to steer you into the direction of the stage card Onigashima. So for 3, you get to rest the stage and you get to ramp 1. And by ramp 1, you get to take a Dawn from your Dawn deck and put it into your Dawn area in rested. That's important, don't put it in active. But it lets you get an additional Dawn every turn, so instead of 2, you are getting 3. Now, why did I start with Onigashima? Because this is one of the cards that you want to see in your opening hand every single game. Thankfully, the deck comes with 4 of them. But if you don't see it in your opening hand, you probably just want to throw your hand back regardless of if you think your hand might be good. There are a couple of things that could change that, maybe. The big drop Kaido, I would consider maybe keeping that hand just because he's good. But this is the card you really want to see in your opening hand. You want to play it on your turn 2, which is, no matter if you go first or second, you can play it because it costs 3, and you will always have at least 3 Dawn on your second turn. But make sure you are very comfortable with this card if you want to play Mr. Kaido. So now we can go over to the leader, and his skill is a, powerhouse leader. He's Mr. Kaido. So once per turn, you can send 7 Dawn back to your Dawn deck, and then you get to trash an opponent's life. And when that happens, they don't get it to their hand. If it's a trigger, it doesn't go off. It's just gone. It just goes straight to the trash. Now, a word of caution, young duelist, because if you use this skill too early, you will beat yourself. And by beat yourself, I mean you can literally lose the game by using this too early or too often. Most of the time, in my experience, you use this skill once a game. And when you use it once a game, it's still good. I usually use it on the last life that they have before I want to go for the final hit. Because if you send 7 Dawn back, you're at 3. And even if you have Onigashima and you didn't use it that turn, you're at 4, which means you're going to go up to 6 the following turn. And depending on the state of the game, 6 might not be enough for you to play enough cards to go back and forth with the opponent. So you really want to be careful when you use this skill. But we're going to go into the Kaido that is in the, the deck, and he is massive. He is 10k base. I repeat, 10k base. He is a big boy. And he's pretty much not going anywhere. Your opponent has to run this over to kill it, which is not easy to do. They have to invest a lot of Dawn in order to try and climb over him, and then you can guard over it. So, do they want to risk that? Do they want to risk you easily guarding a 10k, or do they want to use that aggressive to go for your face? That is up to them, but it is hard to run this guy over. And his effect gives him rush. His effect on play, Dawn minus 5, you put 5 Dawn back, you get to KO any of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less, and then this character gains rush. So you get to pop a pretty decently big guy, and then he gains rush. So he just goes straight in. So he can attack the turn he's played, and he is 10k. And because he costs 9, you can still leave 1 up, which is important. But this was the other card that I wanted to tell you about. If you open this 9-drop Kaido, there are only 2 in the deck, so if you see him, you might want to keep your hand even without the Onigashima, because you are not guaranteed to see this card. There is actually draw power in the deck, which is fantastic, but that does not guarantee you seeing a 2-of, so keep that in mind. Now, this deck has an advantage engine, and we will go through that one right now. Why not? There are 2 solid cards that give you advantage, and then one that's like, takes it. Well, a lot of them take advantage from the opponent, because this deck, Crocodile deck, see, revolves around bouncing your opponent's cards to their hand, and this deck revolves around just popping them and just getting them off the board. But in order to get that trade-off, you need to send Dawn back to the Dawn deck. That is how it makes up for the fact that they're just getting rid of the card entirely. So the first card that gives you advantage is a Queen here, and he is a 6k blocker. And this man, on play, send one Dawn back, you have to draw 2 and discard any card from your hand. So first of all, that's a straight plus. And second of all, it lets you actually get rid of extra copies of, say, the Onigashima, because you're only going to ever need the one on the field. So if you have the Onigashima, it is the perfect discard outlet, and you will in fact get 2 cards out of this instead of, the one that you would get normally. And the other plus engine is the Sasaki, who I call Triceracopter because of his attack from the series, if you know how that works. But he lets you just draw a card. On play, Dawn -1, draw a card. He is the definition of an advantage card. It's simple and gives you a solid +1. But that is all these Dawn- skills is another reason why you want the Onigashima in your opening hand, because it essentially makes all of these effects completely free, and free is good when you're a card game player. Now that we're done with the little advantage engine, we can go ahead and go into the second super rare, which is King, who is the kind of the counterpart to Kaido. Kaido is bigger and pops higher, and then King is a little bit smaller and pops lower. Dawn -1, when he's played, you get to KO any of your opponent's cost 4 or less. So he's kind of like your B team Kaido. Like if you don't see Kaido, you might see King, and King is 7k. That's a really good number. Going back to the magic number mechanic, you really want to try and always swing for that 7k number, and he just does it by himself, which is good, and kills a cost 4 or less. That's a decent number. It doesn't kill any like boss guys, but it clears pretty much any little blockers. The 4 isn't alright. Not a great number, but it's an alright number. It's his 7k that really makes him solid. Moving into Ulti here. Ulti is your 2k guard, and you actually have 4 of her in the deck, which is fantastic. But she also has an on-play effect that you need to pay attention about, because you might want to use this. Because when she is played, you can Dawn -1 to play a page 1 with a cost of 4 less from your hand, and that is the cost. You don't have to pay for the page 1. Page 1 is her brother, who is over here, and this is Pepe, and he's just a nice 6k vanilla. So you pay 4 for Ulti, you send 1 back, one of your rested, which you can do, and for the 4 investment, you get a 5k and a 6k attacker. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. So if you do end up drawing both of them, you can consider doing that. Builds up a nice little bit of attacking on the following turn. But even if you don't have the combo, she's 2k guard, so she's good in hand. Then we can go on to Mr. Jack over here. Jack is simple. You don't always want to play him because he is a discard cost, but on play discard, you get to ramp a Dawn in active. So this is important that you have to remember that that Jack does active and Onigashima does rest. So you can use Dawn immediately when you use Jack. So that can make some interesting turns. Now, Who's Who is my favorite trigger guy because on play Dawn -1, KO any of your opponent's costs 3 or less, and it is really good. You only get 2 of them, but we'll have to deal. Because he's a trigger, so you can play this during your opponent's turn, and his effect will go off. And even if he doesn't, you can save him and pop all the little blockers in the world that you want that might be standing in your way. And if they are trying to go in with some 3-cost attackers, you can pop those too, and they don't need to be rested or anything. He just clears them right off the board. We have our normal, 5k vanilla. This is our 4k vanilla. And this deck does not have a 1-drop blocker. It has a 2-drop blocker in the Black Maria. And the trade-off here is that she has guard. It's not much of a trade-off to me because, a 1-drop blocker, you just pay for 1 and it blocks an attack anyway. So having guard on a 1-drop blocker doesn't particularly matter to me personally. I think it's kind of like whatever. But, you have your smallish blocker. And then your 1-drop 3K. We can go into the events now. We have Brachio Bomber. So this is like a more expensive version of Jet Pistol from the red deck. So it costs 6, and then you can kill anything that's cost 6 or less. So instead of using attack value, it goes with the cost value of whatever you're trying to kill. And then you get to ramp 1 into active. So technically, it costs 5. If you think about it that way, because it gives you 1 back. depending on the current state of the game, because obviously if you're full, you can't say it costs 5 because you're full, it won't give you one, but if you play this and you resolve the ramp, it's a cost 5. Sure. Alright, because it comes in active, so you can use it. And then as a trigger, you ramp one when it's triggered. I don't know about that. I don't know if I would ever really want to use that. I might just want the Bracket Bomber in hand and then try to resolve it and I get the ramp anyway, because it doesn't pop. And then All-Star Calamities is the opposite of that, where you just always want to trigger it, because trigger is just its main effect, which is draw 1 and ramp 1. I don't like seeing this card in my hand, to be honest, because I don't like paying the 4 just to draw a card to replace itself and then get 1 ramp. But when you get it off a trigger, you feel like the greatest person in the world, because it replaces itself immediately and gives you a free ramp. It is literally just a free ramp. Of course, it's only really good in the early game, but because you're sending Dawn back, which, I mean, obviously you can't control when this gets triggered, but if it does get triggered in that exact moment when you're sending Dawn back and you're low again, it can be good. But not my favorite. Now, my favorite is actually a Bolo Breathu. This is a 1 cost that gives 4k, and the only downside is you -1 Dawn, and in this deck where you're ramping, it's like whatever. So this makes you very tanky, because you have the 1-drop 4k plus, and then you have the 4 ultis. So that's why I'm talking about when you have the big Kaido on the board and he's sitting there rested, if your opponent wants to try and attack into this, and you have a hand, and if you have a Dawn up, they have to worry about going through a Bolo Breath and an ulti. You pretty much just want to go for face. You're almost never going to run this over unless your opponent just has no hand. And if they don't have a hand, I would suggest, going for this guy so that you can get him off the board. So what are our combos here? So the thing with this deck is that there's no real combos. It's more of just there's a lot of single static good cards, which is good. You don't have to worry about drawing pieces for a combo. The only real combo is the ulti and the Pepe to get on the board. Other than that, these are all just good cards by themselves. You just want to play them out effectively, get their effects off, get pluses, pop cards that you want off the board. And then when you wind down your opponent to about the 1 life mark, you want to play your Kaido leader skill, clear that life off, and just kind of push for game. The best way to do that is if you have a king or a Kaido established on the board when you go into your turn and they have 1 life. And then you just want to, maybe you have some cards to play first, because you can use your rested Dawn to use your Kaido effect. And then you want to spend the 7. You get rid of the last, and you have 3 left. And as long as you have, a king or a Kaido, you can give that 3 to the king or the Kaido and make a 10 or a 13. And even if you don't, you can always make an 8 leader, but then you also still have your leader swing. And that's usually enough, depending, if they have a big hand size, you might want to think about it. But if they have a 3-card hand, that's usually, it's pretty much game, unless they have a bunch of Dawn up and you think they have a bunch of events. That's another thing you have to think about. That's more, the player aspect of it. But I am very comfortable with this deck. I think this is the deck that I am going to be playing personally, because I just like the feel of it. And go ahead and give a Bolo Breathu to our sub button so that you can be up to date on all of our new One Piece card game content that we plan to keep on going, as this game is finally going to be released, starting with those starter decks at the end of the month for the super pre-release, and I cannot wait. What is a question of the day that I can give here? Well, I guess since it's a Kaido deck, who is your favorite Kaido crew member? If you know his big crew. There are several members in the starter deck, but there are a couple that are not mentioned here. So if you have a favorite Kaido crew member, let us know in the comments down below. And I think we will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.